Of all of the countries on Earth, one has a system in which groups of private citizens can band together and sponsor a refugee's immigration. That country is Canada. Today I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that process with special reference to sponsoring LGBTQ refugees fleeing persecution in their home countries. Essentially, there are three main ways for a refugee to become a permanent resident of Canada. First, they can enter the country or appear at the border and then claim refugee status. This is a difficult process involving a great deal of uncertainty. Second, refugees can apply for refugee status directly to the Canadian government embassies abroad. The government itself then brings a limited number of refugees over to Canada. The third system is the unique one. Groups of Canadians can band together as sponsorship circles to bring over an individual, a couple, or a family. These are sometimes referred to as a group of five because there has to be a minimum of 5 people involved. In practice, these groups are typically bigger. A sponsorship circle works in relationship with an organization that has a special relationship with the government for the purpose of refugee coordination. These organizations are called Sponsorship Agreement Holders, or SAHs, or SAWs. A SAW might be a church group, a service club like the Rotarians, or another type of organization. Other organizing groups operate under the auspices of one or another of these SAWs. In the LGBTQ community, there are 2 main organizations that operate under a SAW: Rainbow Refugee in Vancouver and Rainbow Railroad in Toronto. These organizations work with sponsorship circles across the country, not just in Vancouver and Toronto, who are working to help people fleeing persecution because of their LGBTQ status. Typically, a sponsorship circle forms with the intent of sponsoring a refugee, but they don't have a particular person in mind at first. Around the world, people in danger contact Rainbow Refugee and Rainbow Railroad requesting help. These are sifted by these organizations, and sponsorship circles review the information and select an individual, a couple, or a family to sponsor. As you can imagine, it's not up to these organizations to decide whether these individuals count as refugees. They usually are screened by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and in every case they are also screened by the Canadian government, usually through their embassy offices abroad. Once the government agrees that the case is legitimate, the agency is notified and the sponsorship circle can formally begin preparations. The group of 5, or 7, or 9, or more is responsible for helping the person for the first 12 months of their residence in Canada. This means raising enough money to pay for their housing, their food, clothing, and related expenses. The government helps a little with a small amount of money and a furniture allowance for the first 3 months, but the vast majority of the expense is borne by the sponsorship circle. The circle also helps by providing English practice, orienting the person to their new hometown, showing them how to use transit, working on establishing foreign qualifications for employment or training, learning about Canadian culture, and providing an initial social circle so that people are not isolated. New Canadians often find the transition quite difficult, and without help, they can have a lot of trouble. Just think of our winters. Most refugees to Canada do not come from countries where getting locked out of your house could cause you to freeze to death in winter. In the case of Rainbow Refugee and Rainbow Railroad, there are other adjustments. Many refugees have been victimized and rejected not only by their governments, but also by their families. Some of them have been imprisoned, some have been tortured, and virtually none have lived in a country as open and accepting of LGBTQs as Canada. They don't know what's safe and what isn't. There's a lot of adjustment that has to take place. Going back to that funding issue, it sounds like a lot of money that these groups have to spend. It is. It's typically $20,000 to $30,000 for an individual, more for a couple or a family. And how are they going to do that? Well, usually these groups engage in fundraising campaigns with friends, family, and the community at large. There are parties with admission fees, benefit concerts, walkathons, raffles, and any other way that people can raise the necessary funds. Luckily, Rainbow Refugee and Rainbow Railroad are both registered charities and can provide tax receipts so that donations are deductible. Eventually, the sponsorship circle has raised enough money, or close enough, that they're ready for the refugee to come to Canada. The government usually arranges their transport, most often by regular airlines, and this provides one of the most powerful moments in the whole process. The sponsorship circle, and usually their friends and a few hangers-on, head to the airport, and they wait there, usually with signs. Welcome home, in English and in the person's own language. My circle got an email from the couple, two guys who are coming to us from Syria via Lebanon. What was the weather likely to be when they arrived? It was late November. They weren't sure if they had the clothes for it. I wrote back saying it had been 1,000 days since Vancouver had had any snow. I'd seen that on the news the previous week. 1,000 days. Well, needless to say, an hour before their plane landed, it started to snow. And snow. And snow. There was snow for weeks after their arrival. We were all gathered in the arrivals area of Vancouver Airport, and we were wondering if we should have brought them boots and parkas. Well, it turns out we didn't have to worry. Their papers were processed in the secure section of the airport, and once they were cleared, they were handed bags by immigration. Winter boots, winter coats, gloves, and hats. They were equipped before they ever got through security. When Canada started the airlift of Syrian refugees in 2015, this was put in place. There were people in Toronto Airport at different stations, one for boots, one for gloves, and so on. There was an attendant for that very first flight at the coat station, helping fit children and families with winter coats. It was Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister. Of course, needless to say, he didn't do it for long. It was a political statement, but it was an indication that Canadians stood behind this process. Today, I don't really know if new refugees still get the coats, hats, and boots, but there is something they still get, and that's a change in status. When they leave the airport and go out to the parking lot with their sponsorship circle, they're not refugees. They are permanent residents of Canada. That change happens when they go through immigration at the airport. Within an hour or so of the plane touching the ground, they stop being refugees. And with any luck, they will never be refugees again. They really are home. There's a lot more I could say about this. Obviously, there are challenges. There's a lot of adjustment. People have often suffered a lot, and that doesn't vanish. Whether they're an LGBTQ refugee or not. And they've left a lot of people back where they came from. But for the most part, it works well. What about Rainbow Refugee and Rainbow Railroad? What if you wanted to get involved? Well, one option, if you're in Canada, is to reach out to them and potentially become a part of a sponsorship circle. Or you can gather a group of friends and create one yourself, and then contact them. But that's not for everyone. Another option is simply to help with the fundraising. You can donate through Canada Helps and get a tax receipt almost instantly. But what if you're not in Canada? Well, you can still donate. Your tax receipt may not help you, but your money will still help the sponsorship circles. And you can look at the ways of helping people in and from your own country as well. You can learn more about these groups at their websites here. And the links are in the description section below. Thanks for watching. Most of my videos are on topics related to mental health. If you want to see some of those, press subscribe below.